The notification from our digital photo frame came at 2:37 a.m. New photos added to family collection. I wasn't supposed to see Nathan replacing our wedding portrait with pictures of himself and Vanessa at our Cannon Beach vacation home, the one my inheritance had paid for. But there they were, his arm around her waist, standing on the same deck where we'd promised forever, the timestamp showing he'd been there just last weekend while telling me he was on a guy's fishing trip. I'm Olivia Mitchell, and this is how I legally removed my husband's name from every property we owned without him knowing until the moment he least expected it, during his promotion celebration dinner in front of his entire executive team. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The digital frame continued its slideshow as I sat motionless. At our kitchen island, the blue light illuminating the space where I'd spent countless evenings waiting for Nathan to return from client meetings that ran suspiciously late. Our wedding photos had been replaced with a dozen new images. Nathan and Vanessa kayaking at our lake house, drinking wine on our deck, and most painfully, posing in front of the wooden sign I'd hand-carved for our 5th anniversary. The Campbells Retreat. I didn't cry. I didn't throw things. Instead, I took a screenshot of each photo, documenting the date and time they were uploaded to our shared cloud account. Then, I opened my laptop and began searching for our property records. The surprising calm I felt wasn't shock, it was clarity. After 3 years of Nathan's increasingly frequent absences, the declining intimacy, and the way he guarded his phone like it contained state secrets, the pieces finally fit together. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overthinking things, as he constantly insisted. "You're always working," he'd say during our rare dinners together. "Men need attention, Liv. We don't do well feeling neglected." All while he texted under the table, his wedding ring occasionally catching the light, the ring I'd saved for months to purchase when we were just starting out. Morning came, and with it, Nathan's text. "Early client breakfast. Don't wait up. Tonight, strategy session will run late." "No problem," I replied, adding a cheerful emoji. "Your dry cleaning is ready for pickup." Mundane, normal communication, exactly what was expected of me. I dressed carefully for work, applying makeup with precision, selecting the tailored charcoal pantsuit Nathan always complimented. My outer appearance betrayed nothing of my midnight discovery or the plans now forming in my mind. I grabbed my briefcase, left our perfectly maintained Craftsman home, and drove not to my office, but to Cascade Brewing on Morrison Street. Megan was already waiting, 2 lattes on the table, her familiar presence a comfort in the upheaval of my reality. My best friend since our undergraduate days, she'd never quite warmed to Nathan, sensing something I'd refused to see until now. "This better be important," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. I had to reschedule a client meeting. Wordlessly, I pushed my phone across the table, open to the gallery of screenshots I'd taken. Megan's expression hardened as she swiped through them, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the phone tighter with each image. "That son of a..." she began, then noticed my calm demeanor. "Wait, you're not crying. Why aren't you crying?" I took a measured sip of my latte. "Because I'm done wasting energy on him. Now I'm focusing it somewhere else." "Divorce lawyer?" Megan suggested, already pulling up contacts on her phone. "My cousin used someone brutal during her split." "The guy's a tactical genius." "Not yet," I interrupted, taking out a folder from my briefcase. "First, I need to understand exactly what we own and how it's titled." I spread the documents on the table between us. Property deeds for our Portland home, the Cannon Beach vacation house, the cabin in Bend, and 2 investment properties we'd purchased with the money I'd inherited when my father died. Properties that, I'd just discovered, were mostly titled with Nathan as either sole owner or primary holder. "That can't be right," Megan said, examining the deeds. "Your dad's money bought most of these." Nathan handled the paperwork, I explained, the bitter taste in my mouth having nothing to do with the coffee. He said it made more sense for tax purposes since he had experience in real estate. I trusted him. And now? Now I need someone with more experience than him. I pulled out my phone again, this time opening my contacts. Remember Daniel Wheeler? From law school? Megan's eyebrows rose. The quiet guy who specialized in property law? The one who asked you out before you met Nathan? I nodded, already composing a text. The very same. He's a partner at Wheeler Legal now, specializes in property transfers and complex real estate transactions. Liv? Megan leaned forward, her voice dropping. What exactly are you planning? I looked up from my phone, meeting her concerned gaze. Nathan's promotion dinner is in 3 weeks, the one he's been talking about nonstop? Where all the company executives will be there to celebrate the new regional director. Yes. By then, I want every property we own transferred out of his name. I closed the folder with a decisive snap. He replaced our memories. I'm going to replace his future. My phone pinged with Daniel's response. Can see you today at 2 p.m. No explanation needed in advance. Wheeler Legal Partners, Pearl District Office. Megan watched me carefully. Are you sure this is the way to go? Not that I'm defending him, but confronting him directly. And give him time to hide assets? To create some narrative where I'm the neglectful wife who drove him to another woman? I shook my head. Nathan excels at 2 things: sales and spinning stories where he's the victim. I'm not giving him the chance to prepare either. As we gathered the documents, Megan asked the question I'd been asking myself since 2:37 a.m. How did you miss the signs? You're the most observant person I know. I saw them, I admitted, remembering the lipstick smudge on his collar 8 months ago that he'd blamed on a marketing assistant's enthusiastic greeting. The weekend trips that returned him more exhausted than when he left. The mysterious charges at restaurants we'd never visited together. I just kept choosing to believe his explanations because the alternative meant everything we built was a lie. And now? Now I'm choosing myself. Daniel Wheeler's office embodied his personality, meticulously organized, unassuming but impressive in its attention to detail. He'd aged well since law school, silver threading his temples, his handshake firm as he welcomed me with professional warmth that held no hint of our brief history. Olivia, he gestured to a chair across from his desk. It's been too long. I placed my folder on his desk. I need to make some changes to property titles, and I need it done quietly and quickly. If he was surprised by my directness, he didn't show it. May I ask why the urgency? I showed him the photos, explaining the situation in precise, unemotional terms. Daniel listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression remaining neutral in a way only seasoned lawyers master. These properties, he finally said, examining the deeds. Some are jointly titled, others have him as primary. Your prenuptial agreement would typically protect your inheritance, but the way these were titled... He frowned, studying the documents more closely. I know. I made a mistake trusting him with this. Daniel looked up, his gaze softening momentarily. Trust isn't a mistake, Olivia. Betrayal is. He turned to his computer, typing rapidly. There are options here. Oregon has some specific provisions about property acquired during marriage, especially with commingled funds. For the next hour, Daniel outlined potential approaches, explaining legal nuances and strategies that might work given our specific situation. I listened carefully, asking questions, weighing risks. The most straightforward approach, Daniel concluded, involves proving the source of funds for these purchases came from your inheritance. We file for property deed revisions based on wrongful titling. It's complex, but doable. How long would that take? Normally? Months. He studied my expression. But you said 3 weeks. Is it possible? Daniel leaned back, considering. With expedited filings, documentation of the inheritance source, and he hesitated. A friendly judge, we might manage it. It won't be cheap. Money isn't my concern right now. He nodded once. Decision made. Then let's get started. I'll need bank records showing the inheritance transfers, any communications about property purchases, and your signature on several documents today. As I signed the first set of papers, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Reservation at Paley's for tomorrow? Want to celebrate my promotion planning. I showed Daniel the message. He's so focused on his career win that he hasn't even noticed I've been accessing our property records online. Men like that rarely notice anything beyond themselves, Daniel observed, then added more professionally, which works to our advantage here. I typed back a response. Perfect. Looking forward to celebrating you. The small heart emoji felt like ash on my fingers, but maintaining normalcy was crucial. As Daniel had explained, any hint of my plans could trigger Nathan to take protective measures with our assets. One more thing, I said as our meeting concluded. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The timing of the final deed recordings. Can we control exactly when they become official? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Technically, yes. Why? Because timing, I said, thinking of Nathan's promotion dinner, is everything. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Not mine, but exposing Nathan's. Each day brought new discoveries as I dug deeper into our financial life. I found credit card statements showing weekend getaways to our properties that aligned perfectly with his business trips. Email receipts for jewelry never given to me. And most damning, a separate email account where he'd been discussing selling our Bend cabin with a realtor without my knowledge. Through it all, I maintained the perfect facade of supportive wife. I attended a company cocktail party on Nathan's arm, smiling as he introduced me to colleagues who would be at his promotion dinner. I listened to him practice his acceptance speech, offering encouraging feedback. I even helped him select a new suit for the occasion. Meanwhile, Daniel worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The documentation of my inheritance was irrefutable. The inappropriate titling of properties became increasingly clear as we gathered evidence. Each property required different legal approaches, but one by one, the revised deeds were prepared. We're filing the Portland House and Cannon Beach property tomorrow, Daniel informed me during one of our regular update meetings. The Bend cabin and rental properties are already in process. Everything should be officially recorded by next Wednesday. The day before his dinner, I confirmed, checking my calendar. Perfect. Olivia, Daniel set down his pen, looking at me directly. Once this happens, there's no going back. Are you certain this is how you want to proceed? Not a formal divorce filing first? I thought about the photos that still appeared. On our digital frame, Nathan either oblivious to my discovery or so confident in his control that he didn't care if I knew. I thought about the years I'd spent supporting his career, managing our home, investing my inheritance in what I believed was our shared future. I'm certain, I said firmly. Nathan believes he's untouchable, that I'll either never discover his betrayal or never have the courage to act on it. He needs to understand exactly what he's losing before we discuss divorce terms. The night before the promotion dinner, I stood in our walk-in closet, selecting my outfit with strategic precision. The navy blue dress was conservative enough for a corporate event, but fitted enough to remind Nathan exactly what he'd been betraying. The diamond necklace, my grandmother's, from my side of the family, would be a final touch of symbolism only I would appreciate. My phone chimed with a message from Daniel. All records filed and recorded as of 4:30 p.m. today. Congratulations. You are now the sole legal owner of all 5 properties. A curious sense of calm washed over me. Not happiness, not quite vindication, but something approaching peace. For the first time since seeing those replacement photos, I felt like I could breathe fully. Nathan arrived home late, buzzing with pre-promotion energy, barely noticing my distraction as he talked about who would be attending tomorrow, what the promotion meant for his career trajectory, how this was just the beginning of his rise in the company. "I have something special planned," I said as he finally wound down, his attention momentarily shifting to me. "A surprise for after the dinner." "Yeah?" His interest piqued, mistaking my meaning entirely. "Looking forward to it?" "Babe." As he showered, I checked my email one last time. Daniel had sent the final documentation, official proof that Nathan Campbell no longer had legal claim to any of our properties. Properties that had always been mine by right, and now were mine by law. Tomorrow, at the timber room, surrounded by the colleagues he so desperately wanted to impress, Nathan would learn that while he'd been replacing our memories, I'd been securing my future. The morning of Nathan's promotion dinner dawned bright and clear, Portland's typical rain giving way to unexpected sunshine that streamed through our bedroom windows. I'd barely slept, my mind cycling through the carefully arranged plans for the evening ahead. Nathan, oblivious to my restlessness, had slept deeply beside me, his face relaxed in the unconscious confidence of a man who believed his world was perfectly aligned with his desires. "Big day," he murmured, eyes still closed as the alarm chimed. His hand reached for mine across the sheets, a reflexive gesture of connection that once would have warmed me. Now I felt nothing but the cool weight of his fingers, the wedding band he still wore like a prop in an elaborate performance. "The biggest?" I agreed, slipping from bed before he could pull me closer. "I'll make coffee." In the kitchen, I moved through familiar routines while checking my phone for final confirmations. Daniel had sent a detailed email outlining exactly what documents I should bring to dinner. Certified copies of the newly recorded deeds, proof of the inheritance funds that had purchased the properties, and a concise summary of Nathan's deception that would be difficult to dispute, especially in public. "Your documentation is impeccable," Daniel had written. "Should he attempt to claim ignorance or manipulation, these papers tell an unambiguous story." Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair damp from his shower, checking his own phone, with the distracted air of a man whose mind was already at the office. "Peterson confirmed for tonight," he announced, accepting the coffee mug I offered. "That's the entire executive board plus regional managers. This is exactly the exposure I've been working for." "Exposure," I echoed, the word tasting strangely appropriate on my tongue. "Exactly what you deserve." He glanced up, catching something in my tone, but my smile dispelled whatever momentary concern had flickered across his features. "You're amazing, you know that? Most wives would be complaining about all the hours I've put in to get here." Most wives weren't subsidizing their husband's affair with their inheritance, I thought. But outwardly, I maintained my supportive facade. "You've worked hard for this. Tonight should reflect that." Speaking of tonight, Nathan checked his watch. "I should get going. Early strategy meeting before the announcement goes public." He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that carried the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne, not the one I'd given him last Christmas. Another small betrayal among many. "Don't forget we're meeting at the restaurant," I reminded him. "I have that appointment with Grace this afternoon." The reference to my mother, who was actually on a cruise in Alaska, passed without question. Nathan had stopped keeping track of my family's whereabouts long ago. "Right." He nodded absently, already moving toward the door. 7 o'clock, the timber room. I'll text if anything changes. After the door closed behind him, I stood motionless in our kitchen, taking in the space we'd shared for 6 years. The farmhouse sink I'd insisted on during renovations, the hand-painted tiles from our trip to Mexico, the copper pots hanging above the island. a housewarming gift from my brother Ryan. So many markers of a shared life, all of them now feeling like artifacts from a museum of falsehoods. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. D-Day. You ready? I looked around once more at the home that was now legally mine alone, feeling an unexpected wave of sadness not for what I was about to do, but for what had already been lost long before I discovered those replaced photos. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied. Rather than visiting my mother, I spent the afternoon in Daniel's office, reviewing our strategy one final time. The conference room walls were lined with the evidence of Nathan's deception: financial records, property documents, and timelines that transformed scattered suspicions into an irrefutable pattern. The legal elements are straightforward, Daniel explained, indicating the certified deed copies arranged before me. These properties are now unquestionably in your name alone, but the personal element tonight, that's where you'll need to be prepared. For what exactly? Denial, deflection, anger, Daniel counted off on his fingers. Men like Nathan rarely accept responsibility, especially publicly. He'll try to control the narrative, paint you as vindictive or irrational. I nodded, having witnessed Nathan's skill at reframing situations to his advantage throughout our marriage. Client conflicts became misunderstandings. Missed anniversaries became unfortunate scheduling errors. Late nights became dedication to our future. I'm not expecting him to accept responsibility, I said, gathering the documents into a slim portfolio Daniel had prepared. I just want him to face consequences. Daniel's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a glimmer of something, respect, perhaps, in his eyes. The certified letter to your home will arrive tomorrow, formally notifying him of the property transfers. By then, it will be a matter of public record. There's nothing he can do to reverse it without a protracted legal battle he's unlikely to win. And the prenuptial agreement? Actually works in your favor here. The inheritance exclusion clause he insisted on cuts both ways. It establishes that inherited funds should remain with the inheriting spouse. Since you can prove these properties were purchased with your inheritance. He has no claim, I finished. Precisely. Though I should warn you, tonight may cost you the marriage. The statement was offered carefully, a necessary legal disclaimer from counsel to client. But we both knew the truth. There was no marriage left to lose. Nathan had already replaced it, piece by piece, with an elaborate fiction. I left Daniel's office feeling strangely weightless, as though the portfolio in my hand contained not just documents, but the physical burden I'd been carrying since that 2:37 a.m. notification. The afternoon stretched before me, hours to fill before the 7 o'clock reservation that would change everything. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself driving to Cannon Beach, the winding coastal highway, a familiar path that followed the contours of memories both sweet and bitter. Nathan and I had discovered the small beachfront property during our first anniversary trip. 2 years later, when my father died unexpectedly, leaving me an inheritance that felt like both blessing and burden, Nathan had suggested investing in the property as a way to honor Dad's memory. A place to build our future, he'd called. It's standing on the deck overlooking the iconic Haystack Rock, his arm around my waist in a pose eerily similar to the one he'd later recreate with Vanessa. The drive took just under 2 hours, the coast appearing through breaks in the towering pines like glimpses of an alternate reality, vast, unchanging, indifferent to human dramas played out against its backdrop. I parked in the small private drive using the key that now represented sole ownership rather than shared dreams. The house stood exactly as we'd left it after our last visit together, except for subtle signs of recent occupation I might have missed had I not been looking for them. A different arrangement of pillows on the window seat, wine glasses in the drying rack that hadn't been there before. A faint lingering scent that wasn't the usual mixture of sea air and pine. I moved through the rooms methodically, opening windows to release the trapped air. gathering scattered evidence of Nathan and Vanessa's visits. In the master bedroom, I found what I was looking for, a forgotten earring on the nightstand, distinctly not mine. I placed it in a small envelope, adding it to the portfolio of documents. Physical proof, unnecessary from a legal perspective, but somehow essential for my own closure. On the deck where we'd once planned our future, I sat watching the afternoon, light play across the water, the vast Pacific stretching toward horizons I'd temporarily lost sight of during my years with Nathan. My phone buzzed periodically, Megan checking in, Daniel with last-minute advice, and finally, Nathan confirming tonight's arrangements with mechanical enthusiasm. As the sun began its descent toward the water, I took one last look at the property that had featured so prominently in both the beginning and end of my marriage. The deed in my portfolio declared it mine alone, but sitting there, I realized ownership was about more than legal documents. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my own life. The drive back to Portland gave me time to shift mental gears, transforming from reflective to resolute as city lights replaced coastal vistas. In our bedroom, I dressed with deliberate care. The navy dress that highlighted my eyes, minimal jewelry save for my grandmother's diamonds, hair swept into a simple but elegant updo that Nathan had once described as intimidatingly beautiful during happier times. The portfolio went into a tailored clutch designed to hold business documents, a gift from my father when I'd passed the CPA exam. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. The traditional bride's checklist flickered inappropriately through my mind as I prepared for what was, in many ways, a ceremony marking the end rather than the beginning. I arrived at the timber room precisely at 6:45, early enough to ensure everything was arranged to my specifications. The restaurant's manager, who had handled the revelation of my special dessert presentation with professional discretion, confirmed that the private dining area was prepared exactly as requested. "Mr. Campbell's colleagues have begun arriving," she informed me, gesturing toward the bar area where men and women in business attire clustered in anticipatory groups. "He called to say he's running about 10 minutes behind schedule." Of course he was. Nathan's calculated lateness to his own celebration was exactly the sort of power move he'd employ, ensuring all eyes were on him when he finally made his entrance. Tonight, however, that theatrical timing would work to my advantage. I spotted several familiar faces among the gathering executives, people who'd attended our holiday parties, whose spouses I'd made small talk with at company functions, who knew us as the enviable power couple Nathan had crafted through careful public appearances. None of them knew the woman who had sat awake at 2:37 a.m., watching photographic evidence of betrayal cycle through a digital frame. None of them knew the woman who now carried property deeds and bank statements in her elegant clutch. They would soon. Nathan arrived with practiced precision at 7:10, entering the restaurant with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His new suit fit impeccably, dark charcoal that emphasized the silver at his temples, premature gray he'd once lamented, but now cultivated as a sign of experience and authority. His eyes found mine across the room, a genuine smile breaking through his composed expression. For a painful moment, I glimpsed the man I'd fallen in love with years ago, the one whose ambition had seemed admirable rather than consuming, whose attention had felt like the sun rather than a spotlight designed to reflect his own brilliance. "Liv," he greeted me with a kiss that landed at the corner of my mouth, his hand warm against the small of my back. "You look incredible." "Congratulations." "Nathan," I replied, meaning it despite everything. He had worked for this promotion, whatever else he'd done along the way. "Your big moment has arrived." "Our moment," he corrected, his voice lowered for my ears alone. "I couldn't have done this without you." The irony of his statement, perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to me in months, nearly broke my composed expression. He truly couldn't have done it without me, without the stability I'd provided, without the properties my inheritance had secured. properties he'd used to entertain his girlfriend while I maintained our primary residence, and social obligations. Dinner proceeded according to plan, course after course of expertly prepared food, accompanied by flowing conversation and strategic flattery as Nathan worked the room from his position at the head of the table. I sat at his right hand, playing my role with precision, laughing at the right moments, contributing appropriately modest anecdotes about Nathan's dedication, accepting compliments on our perfect partnership with practiced grace. "A toast," announced Howard Peterson, the regional director whose position Nathan would soon fill, rising to his feet as dessert was being arranged. "To Nathan Campbell, whose vision and determination exemplify everything our company values. And to Olivia," he nodded in my direction, "whose support has been instrumental in Nathan's success." Glasses raised around the table, the crystal catching light like the facets of a complicated truth. I sipped my champagne, feeling the moment build toward its inevitable climax. "Nathan, would you like to say a few words before we bring out the celebration cake?" Peterson prompted, yielding the floor with a magnanimous gesture. Nathan stood, buttoning his jacket with the unconscious elegance of a man comfortable in the spotlight. His speech was perfectly calibrated, gracious acknowledgement of mentors, appropriate humility balanced with confident vision, and finally, a tribute to me that might have moved me had I not known its hollowness. "And most importantly, I want to thank my wife, Olivia." He turned toward me, his expression sincere enough to fool anyone who hadn't seen the replaced photographs or found another woman's earring on their bedside table. Without her unwavering support, her patience during the long hours and missed weekends, and her remarkable ability to manage our life together while I pursued this goal, none of this would be possible. He raised his glass in my direction. "To Olivia, my foundation." The table erupted in appreciative applause. The moment had arrived. The restaurant manager caught my eye from the doorway, a subtle confirmation that everything was in place. "Actually," I said, rising from my seat with poised deliberation, "I'd like to say a few words myself, if that's all right." Nathan's surprise was evident but quickly masked with an indulgent smile. In our 6 years of marriage, I'd never been one to seek attention at his professional events, content to remain in the supportive role he'd crafted for me. "Of course, honey," he agreed, retaking his seat with the confident air of a man who expected nothing but further validation. I moved to the small space at the head of the table, opening my clutch to withdraw not notes for a congratulatory speech, but the portfolio containing certified property deeds and bank records. The weight of all eyes upon me created a moment of crystalline clarity. There would be no returning from what I was about to do. "Nathan spoke about foundation," I began, my voice steady and clear. "It's an apt metaphor, particularly tonight. A foundation provides stability, security, a base upon which to build a future." I looked directly at Nathan, whose expression remained pleasantly attentive, though a flicker of uncertainty had appeared in his eyes. What Nathan didn't mention is that the literal foundation of our life together, our home in Irvington, our beach house in Cannon Beach, our cabin in Bend, and 2 investment properties, were all purchased with my inheritance following my father's death. A subtle shift occurred around the table, executives exchanging glances as the tone of my speech deviated from the expected script of spousal adoration. "Nathan has always been skilled at recognizing opportunity," I continued, maintaining my composed delivery. "It's what makes him valuable to your company. It's also what led him to ensure those properties were titled primarily in his name, despite being purchased with my inherited funds." Nathan's pleasant expression had frozen, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. "Liv," he interjected, a warning note in his voice. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for financial discussions." "Oh, but it is," I countered smoothly. Because while Nathan was working those long hours and missed weekends he mentioned, he wasn't always at the office. In fact, he was often at our Cannon Beach property with his girlfriend, Vanessa. The silence that descended over the table was absolute, broken only by the soft clink of someone's fork against fine china. Nathan's face had drained of color, his confident posture collapsing into rigid tension. "I discovered this 3 weeks ago," I explained, withdrawing the first document from my portfolio. Along with the fact that Nathan had been exploring selling our Ben cabin without my knowledge or consent. What I also discovered, upon reviewing our property deeds, was the discrepancy between who paid for these properties and who legally owned them. I placed the certified copy of the original deed to our Portland home on the table, sliding it toward Peterson. This shows the original titling, with Nathan as primary owner despite the property being purchased entirely with my inherited funds. Howard Peterson examined the document I'd handed him, his professional composure barely masking the discomfort of witnessing what had clearly evolved beyond a simple celebration dinner. The other executives shifted in their seats, caught in that peculiar tension between voyeuristic fascination and the desire to escape an increasingly personal confrontation. Nathan recovered quickly, years of sales experience kicking in as he manufactured a dismissive laugh. "Olivia, honey, this really isn't the time or place for complex financial discussions that no one here is interested in." His eyes darted around the table, seeking alliance. "I think the stress of supporting my career has gotten to her a bit tonight." The patronizing tone, the subtle implication of emotional instability, tactics I'd seen him deploy in disagreements throughout our marriage. I'd anticipated this exact response, planned for it, and now felt oddly detached watching this predictable performance. "Actually," I continued calmly, "I think everyone here is quite interested in integrity. Wouldn't you agree?" I withdrew the next document from my portfolio, a certified copy of the revised deed to our Portland home, dated yesterday, particularly when it involves someone being promoted to oversee regional operations. I placed the revised deed beside the original that Peterson still held. This is the corrected property deed for our primary residence, legally recorded yesterday. You'll notice it now correctly shows me as sole owner, reflecting the actual source of funds used for purchase. Nathan's expression hardened as he abandoned the concerned husband act. "What exactly did you do?" His voice had dropped, the public mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. Rather than answering him directly, I continued addressing the table at large, maintaining the professional tone that mirrored their corporate environment. Over the past 3 weeks, I've had all 5 of our properties legally retitled to accurately reflect their purchase with my inherited funds that were explicitly protected in our prenuptial agreement. I removed the remaining documents, one by one, creating a neat arrangement on the table. Before and after deeds for each property, bank statements showing the inheritance transfers, and finally, a printed copy of the photographs I'd discovered on our digital frame. These images show Nathan and his girlfriend Vanessa at our Cannon Beach property 2 weekends ago during what was supposedly a fishing trip with colleagues. I nodded toward Jason Fletcher, another executive whose surprise confirmed he'd known nothing of any fishing expedition. They were uploaded to our shared cloud account at 2:37 in the morning, replacing our wedding photos in the digital frame kept in our kitchen. The strategic humiliation was precise, not emotional, but factual. Not accusatory, but evidential. Nathan's carefully cultivated professional image was unraveling thread by thread in front of the very people whose respect he'd worked years to earn. "This is ridiculous," Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against hardwood. "These are private matters that have nothing to do with my professional capabilities. And frankly, Olivia's actions demonstrate exactly why I've handled our financial affairs. She clearly doesn't understand basic property law." I smiled slightly, having anticipated this exact deflection. That's why I consulted Daniel Wheeler, managing partner at Wheeler Legal. Perhaps you remember him from the Portland Business Journal's Top 40 Under 40 list last year? His property law expertise is quite renowned in Oregon. I withdrew Daniel's business card, placing it atop the documents. He confirmed that since these properties were purchased primarily with my protected inheritance, the original titling was inappropriate. The courts agreed. Nathan's face flushed with anger, the public composure he prided himself on crumbling. You went behind my back to change property deeds without my knowledge? That's legal? I supplied. Yes, completely. Just as legal as your attempt to sell our Bend cabin without consulting me. I slid the email printout from his secret correspondence with the realtor across the table. The difference is, my actions corrected an injustice. Yours perpetuated one. Peterson cleared his throat, clearly searching for some way to diffuse the situation without taking sides. Perhaps we should adjourn the dinner and allow you two to discuss these matters privately. An excellent suggestion, I agreed, gathering the documents back into my portfolio with deliberate care. Though I should mention that a formal notice of the property transfers was delivered to our home this afternoon. Nathan is welcome to contest the changes legally, of course, though Mr. Wheeler advised that would be rather expensive and ultimately unsuccessful given the documentation. Nathan's eyes narrowed, calculation replacing shock as he assessed the damage to both his personal finances and professional reputation. You've been planning this for weeks, he realized aloud, all while pretending everything was normal, helping me prepare for tonight. Yes, I acknowledged simply. I learned from the best after all. You've been maintaining two separate realities for quite some time, your marriage and your relationship with Vanessa. I simply created my own separate track. The restaurant manager approached tentatively. Should we still bring out the celebration cake? The question, so absurdly ordinary amid the extraordinary tension, broke something in the atmosphere. A muffled laugh escaped one of the younger executives, quickly disguised as a cough. Peterson waved the manager away with a pained expression. I closed my clutch with a decisive snap. I believe my portion of the evening has concluded. Please, don't let this situation overshadow Nathan's professional achievement. He's worked very hard for this promotion. I turned to face my husband directly. I'll be staying with Megan tonight. I suggest you use the time to consider your next steps carefully. Something flickered across Nathan's face. Not remorse? Exactly, but perhaps the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. Liv, wait! The time for waiting has passed, I replied, my voice finally betraying a hint of the anger I'd controlled for weeks. I waited while you lied about your whereabouts. I waited while you used my inheritance to fund your affair. I waited while you replaced our memories with new ones featuring your girlfriend. I've done enough waiting. I turned to address the table once more. It was lovely meeting all of you. I wish circumstances had been different. With a final nod to Peterson, I walked from the private dining room with measured steps, feeling Nathan's stare burning into my back, but not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me glance backward. The main restaurant was still bustling with Friday night diners, the normal rhythm of couples enjoying meals and friends sharing laughter, creating a surreal contrast to the scene I'd just left. At the bar, Megan sat perched on a stool, her attention focused on the entrance to the private dining area. When she spotted me, her expression transformed from anxiety to cautious relief. Well? She asked as I approached. It's done, I confirmed, suddenly feeling the weight of the past 3 weeks, the planning, the legal consultations, the maintenance of normalcy, while orchestrating Nathan's reckoning. Exactly as planned. Megan retrieved my coat from the bar, her gaze evaluating my composure. No tears? Not yet, I admitted, though I expect they'll come eventually. We exited the timber room together, stepping into the cool Portland evening where rain had begun falling in a gentle mist that seemed to blur the sharp edges of reality. My carefully arranged hair would frizz, my makeup would smudge, But these small imperfections felt strangely appropriate for the moment. The polished facade was no longer necessary. "What's next?" Megan asked as we walked toward her car, her umbrella sheltering us both. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. For so long, all my energy has been focused on tonight, on making sure the properties were legally secured before he could hide them or liquidate them. "Well, you've got a pretty impressive real estate portfolio now," Megan observed, attempting to lighten the moment. 5 properties free and clear, solely in your name." The statement should have felt triumphant, but instead it highlighted the hollowness at the center of my victory. I'd reclaimed my inheritance, my properties, my legal rights, but the life I'd thought I was building had still crumbled. "I keep thinking about something my dad used to say," I murmured as we reached Megan's car, "that the true measure of wealth isn't what you own, but what you build." "And you'll build something new," Megan assured me, unlocking the doors with a beep that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet street. "Something that's actually yours this time, not a false foundation for someone else's benefit." As we drove through rain-slicked streets toward Megan's downtown apartment, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Nathan, of course, alternating between accusatory texts and pleading calls. I silenced the device without reading any of his messages, knowing they would follow a predictable pattern of blame, self-justification, and eventually, when those failed, hollow remorse. Megan's apartment welcomed me with the comfort of familiar surroundings and the promise of sanctuary. She'd prepared the guest room with thoughtful touches, fresh flowers on the nightstand, a new toothbrush in the bathroom, and a bottle of the expensive Cabernet we saved for significant moments. "I figured tonight qualified for the good stuff," she explained, retrieving 2 glasses from her kitchen cabinet, regardless of how it went. We settled on her living room sofa, the city lights glimmering through rain-streaked windows as I recounted the details of the dinner, Nathan's reactions, and the varied responses of his colleagues. The wine loosened the tight control I'd maintained for weeks, allowing me to finally process the reality of what had transpired. "The strangest part," I confessed, halfway through my second glass, "was that, for a moment, just a brief moment when he first arrived, I remembered why I fell in love with him, and it hurt all over again." Megan nodded, understanding without diminishing the complexity of my feelings. "That doesn't make you weak, Liv. It makes you human. You can recognize what was genuine even while acknowledging what became false." My phone buzzed again on the coffee table, Nathan's face appearing on the screen for what must have been his 20th call attempt. I reached for it, not to answer, but to power it off completely, when a text preview caught my attention. Not from Nathan, but from an unknown number. "This is Vanessa Reed. We need to talk." I stared at the notification, a fresh wave of emotion washing over me. Not the anger I'd expected, but a strange sense of inevitability. Of course she would reach out. Nathan's carefully separated worlds were colliding, and she was now caught in the wreckage as surely as I had been. "Vanessa," I said aloud, showing Megan the message. "How did she even get my number?" "Probably from Nathan's phone," Megan reasoned. "What are you going to do? Talk to her?" I contemplated the question, swirling the remaining wine in my glass, as I considered my options. The methodical planner in me, the woman who had orchestrated tonight's revelations with precision, wanted to ignore the message, to maintain the clean break I'd envisioned. But another part of me, perhaps the part still processing the shock of those replaced photographs, was unexpectedly curious. "Not tonight," I decided finally. "Whatever she has to say can wait until I've had some sleep." Sleep, however, proved elusive. In Megan's comfortable guest room, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the evening, from my marriage, from the meticulous 3 weeks of planning that had culminated in tonight's confrontation. The property deeds were secured, the legal maneuvers complete, but the emotional landscape remained unsettled, filled with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Why Vanessa? How long had it truly been going on? Had any part of our marriage been genuine? And perhaps most troublingly, had I been so focused on supporting Nathan's ambitions that I'd failed to see the growing distance between us until it was too late? Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep, wrapping myself in the plush robe Megan had left for me and wandering to her kitchen for a glass of water. The city was quiet at this hour, the rain having subsided to leave glistening streets and a strange clarity to the air. From the kitchen window, I could see the lights of downtown Portland, including the faint glow from the direction of my Irvington home. Our home, though not for much longer. My phone, which I'd finally silenced completely, sat on the counter where I'd left it. Without fully intending to, I found myself powering it back on, watching as notifications flooded the screen. 27 missed calls from Nathan, 42 text messages, 3 voicemails, and that single text from Vanessa, still unanswered. Against better judgment, I opened Nathan's messages, scrolling through the predictable progression Megan had anticipated. Initial anger. How dare you humiliate me like this? Shifting to defensive justification. You've been so distant, so focused on your career. Then to minimization. It wasn't serious with Vanessa, just a distraction. And finally, to desperate pleading. Please come home so we can talk, I'll fix this. We can work through this. The voicemails followed a similar pattern, his voice transitioning from controlled fury to slurred emotional appeals, suggesting he'd continued drinking after I'd left. In the background of the final message, I could hear the distinctive acoustics of our Portland home, confirming he'd returned there after the disastrous dinner. Almost without conscious decision, I opened Vanessa's message again, my finger hovering over the reply field. What could she possibly have to say that I needed to hear? What explanation could justify her role in this betrayal? And yet, there was something unfinished about simply ignoring her, as though leaving that communication unopened would somehow prevent me from fully closing this chapter. Before I could reconsider, I typed a brief response. What do you want, Vanessa? The reply came almost immediately, suggesting she'd been waiting anxiously for my response despite the hour. To explain and to apologize. Nathan told me you were separated. I only learned the truth tonight. I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping me in the quiet kitchen. Of course he had. The classic deception, so predictable it was almost disappointing. Had I expected something more creative from Nathan? Some unique manipulation that might at least suggest Vanessa hadn't been just another cliché in his midlife crisis narrative? Nothing you can say will change what happened, I replied after a long moment. We both made choices based on what we believed. Her response appeared quickly. Mine were based on lies. I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. I'm sorry, Olivia. You didn't deserve this. The simple acknowledgement, you didn't deserve this, struck something deep within me, releasing tears I'd managed to contain throughout. The meticulously planned confrontation. Not for Nathan, or even for our failed marriage, but for the woman who had sat alone at 2:37 a.m., watching indisputable evidence of betrayal cycle through a digital frame that had once displayed happier memories. I set the phone down without responding further, letting the tears flow freely as I gazed out at the city that suddenly seemed filled with possibilities rather than memories. The properties I'd reclaimed represented not just financial security, but freedom, to sell them if I chose, to keep them, to create new memories within their walls untainted by deception. By dawn, I'd moved from grief to something approaching resolve. Megan found me at her kitchen table, laptop open, a notepad filled with lists and calculations beside a fresh cup of coffee. You're up early, she observed, pouring her own coffee, with the caution of someone approaching a potentially volatile situation. Everything okay? I'm figuring out next steps, I explained, gesturing to my notes. The Portland house will need to be sold. Too many memories there. But I think I'll keep the beach property, at least for now, after a thorough cleaning and some redecorating. Megan studied me over her coffee mug, concern evident in her expression. That's very practical. But are you actually okay, Liv? The question gave me pause. Was I okay? The marriage I'd invested 6 years in had imploded spectacularly. My husband had betrayed me in ways both intimate and financial. I'd orchestrated a public revelation that had almost certainly damaged his career prospects along with our relationship. I will be, I decided finally. Not today, probably not. Tomorrow, but eventually. My phone buzzed again. Nathan, still trying to reach me. This time, instead of ignoring it, I answered with calm determination. Yes? His voice came in a rush, words tumbling over each other with uncharacteristic desperation. Liv, thank God. We need to talk. What you did last night. You have to understand how this looks to everyone. My position at the company is at risk now. Peterson called an emergency meeting for this morning. If you just come home, explain it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I interrupted, my voice steady. It was a correction. The properties are now properly titled to reflect who actually paid for them. With money that came into our marriage, he countered, a hint of his usual confidence returning. Everything we built was as a partnership, Liv. You can't just unilaterally decide. Like you unilaterally decided to bring another woman to our vacation home? To replace our wedding photos? To explore selling property without consulting me? Each question emerged calm but precise, like surgical incisions. Those decisions seem considerably more unilateral than correcting fraudulent property titles. The line went quiet for a moment before Nathan shifted tactics. I made mistakes, he admitted, his tone softening to the persuasive cadence he used with reluctant clients. Terrible mistakes that hurt you deeply. But 6 years of marriage deserves more than this. We owe it to ourselves to at least try counseling, to see if we can rebuild the trust. 6 months ago, perhaps even 3 months ago, such an appeal might have swayed me. The Olivia who had built her identity around being Nathan's supportive wife, who had adjusted her own ambitions to accommodate his, might have been willing to attempt reconciliation despite the betrayal. But that woman had been transformed by a 2:37 a.m. notification, by the methodical gathering of evidence, by the reclamation of property that represented not just financial assets, but personal agency. I'll have my attorney contact you regarding next steps, I replied, professional rather than emotional. I'd appreciate if you could be out of the Portland house by the end of next week. You're welcome to the furniture we purchased together. But anything bought with my inheritance funds will remain. Liv, please. Goodbye, Nathan. The call ended with a finality that felt like closing a book mid-chapter, abrupt but necessary. Some stories didn't deserve to be finished, especially when the plot had devolved into predictable deception. Megan watched me carefully as I set the phone down. Well, that sounded definitive. It was, I confirmed, returning to my laptop where property listings for downtown condos filled the screen. I'm thinking it's time for a fresh start, something completely different from the Craftsman in Irvington. You know you can stay here as long as you need, Megan offered, gesturing around her apartment. No rush to figure everything out immediately. I smiled at my friend, grateful for her steady presence throughout this upheaval. I know, but I've spent too long in waiting patterns. First, waiting for Nathan's career to stabilize so we could start a family. Then, waiting for him to be more present in our marriage. Then, waiting to gather evidence and secure the properties. I closed the laptop, a decision crystallizing that had nothing to do with real estate or legal maneuvers. I think I'm done waiting for life to happen according to someone else's timeline. The realization felt like stepping from shadow into unexpected sunlight, disorienting but warming. The properties I'd reclaimed were not just assets, but opportunities. Blank canvases awaiting new stories that had nothing to do with betrayal or calculated deception. "So what happens now?" Megan asked, settling across from me at the kitchen table. I glanced at my phone, now silent as Nathan apparently processed the finality of our conversation, and thought about the property deeds secured in my portfolio, the possibilities they represented, and the woman I was becoming in the aftermath of deception. "Now," I said with unexpected certainty, "I build something authentic on the foundation I've reclaimed." The week following what Megan had taken to calling the Timber Room takedown unfolded in unexpected patterns. While I had anticipated anger, legal threats, or even desperate attempts at reconciliation from Nathan, what emerged instead was a strange, unsettling silence. After our brief morning-after phone conversation, he had seemingly vanished. Not physically, as his car occasionally appeared and disappeared from our Irvington driveway, but emotionally, retreating into a strategic absence that left me feeling oddly untethered. Daniel called on Monday morning, his tone professionally neutral, but unable to completely mask his concern. Nathan's attorney reached out, he informed me as I sat in Megan's kitchen, watching rain streak the windows in typical Portland fashion. "Martin Edwards from Watkins & Edwards. They'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the property transfers and potential dissolution proceedings." "Martin Edwards," I repeated, the name triggering recognition. "Nathan's golf buddy? The one who spoke at our wedding?" "The very same," Daniel confirmed. "Which presents an obvious conflict of interest I've already pointed out to them. I suggested they find different representation if they want to proceed." I considered this development, stirring honey into my tea with measured movements. "And if they don't? Then we document the conflict, which strengthens our position if this eventually reaches a judge." Daniel's voice shifted, becoming less lawyer and more concerned friend. "How are you holding up, Olivia?" The question was simple but unexpectedly difficult to answer. How was I? The past week had passed in a blur of practical arrangements, extending my stay at Megan's, retrieving essential items from the Irvington house during Nathan's work hours, consulting with a financial advisor about investment strategies for a woman suddenly managing 5 properties independently. I'd been so focused on logistics that I'd barely processed the emotional reality. "I'm functioning," I offered finally, the inadequacy of the response apparent even to me. "Taking things day by day." "That's often the best approach," Daniel acknowledged. "Just remember you don't have to manage everything perfectly. Property deeds might be straightforward legal documents, but marriages, and their endings, rarely are." After the call ended, I sat with my cooling tea, contemplating Daniel's observation. The property transfers had been clinical, strategic, documents filed, records amended, ownership clarified with legal precision. But the human element remained messier, filled with unanswered questions and unresolved feelings that couldn't be addressed through certified paperwork. My phone chimed with a text from Ryan, my brother, who had been traveling in Asia when the confrontation occurred and was only now catching up with family developments. "Just heard from Mom. What the actual hell, Liv? Call me ASAP." The message prompted another realization. While I'd kept Megan informed throughout my planning, I'd maintained my supportive wife facade for everyone else, including my own family. They knew nothing of Nathan's betrayal, the property transfers, or my carefully orchestrated revelation at his promotion dinner. The narrative control Nathan had maintained in our marriage had somehow extended to my own instincts, keeping things contained, managed, private, even when privacy served his deceptions rather than our relationship. I dialed Ryan's number, bracing myself for the challenge of condensing 3 weeks of strategic planning and 6 years of marital disillusionment into a coherent explanation. "Olivia Grace Mitchell." My brother's voice came through immediately, familiar and grounding despite the distance. Mom's message was cryptic as hell. "Something about you and Nathan separating and property disputes. What's going on?" The question opened a floodgate. For the next hour, I detailed everything: the 2:37 a.m. photo discovery, the realization about the property titles, the methodical evidence gathering, and finally, the calculated confrontation at the timber room. Ryan listened without interruption, a rare occurrence for my typically vocal brother, only occasionally making sounds of disbelief or muttered profanities. "Jesus, Liv," he exhaled when I finally finished. I don't even have words. Why didn't you tell me what was happening? I would have been on the next flight home. That's exactly why, I admitted, realizing the truth as I spoke it. I needed to handle this myself, not as Nathan's wife or Ryan's sister or anyone else's. Anything, just as me making decisions about my life and my inheritance. The line went quiet for a moment before Ryan spoke again, his voice gentler than his usual boisterous tone. "I get that. But you know you're never just on your own, right? Independent doesn't have to mean isolated." His words resonated more, deeply than expected, illuminating the fine line I'd been walking, between necessary self-reliance and unnecessary solitude, between reclaiming agency and rejecting support. In focusing so intently on legally securing what was mine, had I maintained the emotional isolation that had characterized the final months of my marriage? "I'm learning that," I acknowledged. Slowly. "So what now?" Ryan asked, echoing Megan's question from days earlier. Divorce proceedings? Property sales? Moving to a remote mountain cabin to write a scathing memoir about cheating husbands? The attempt at humor broke the tension, drawing a genuine laugh from me for what felt like the first time in weeks. The memoir is tempting, but I'm thinking more practically for now. I need to decide what to do with the properties, especially the Portland house. Being there alone feels wrong somehow. "Sell it," Ryan suggested promptly. "Too many memories and, frankly, too much of Nathan's design influence. That industrial kitchen island he insisted on was always ridiculous." "It was, wasn't it?" I agreed, remembering Nathan's passionate arguments for stainless steel over the warmer wood I'd preferred. Like cooking in an operating room. This small shared criticism of Nathan's taste, trivial in the grand scheme of betrayals, somehow normalized the situation more than any sympathetic platitude could have. Ryan and I spent another half hour discussing property options, potential next steps, and his upcoming return to Portland, ending the call with a promise for dinner once he was back. The conversation left me feeling strangely energized, ready to move beyond the holding pattern of the past week. I opened my laptop and began researching downtown Portland condos with more focus, concentrating on light-filled spaces with views of either the river or the West Hills, as different as possible from the carefully restored craftsman Nathan had convinced me was essential to projecting the right image for his career advancement. Midway through my third virtual tour, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, anticipating another call from Nathan's circle attempting to mediate or minimize, but curiosity won out. "Olivia Mitchell speaking." "Ms. Mitchell, this is Howard Peterson from Lincoln Northwest." The regional director's voice was formal, but not unfriendly. "I hope I'm not intruding on your day." "Not at all," I replied cautiously, wondering what could possibly motivate Nathan's boss to contact me directly after witnessing our marital implosion at his celebration dinner. "What can I do for you, Mr. Peterson?" I wanted to reach out personally regarding the situation with Nathan. He paused, seeming to carefully select his next words. "First, to apologize for any role our company culture may have played in facilitating the circumstances you described. The travel expectations and after-hours networking events that kept him away from home." "Mr. Peterson," I interrupted gently. "While I appreciate the sentiment, Nathan's choices were his own. Lincoln Northwest didn't force him to use my inheritance to purchase properties where he entertained another woman." "No, of course not," Peterson agreed quickly. "But there's another matter I wanted to discuss with you directly. Our financial compliance team has begun reviewing Nathan's expense reports following the revelations at dinner. We've discovered some concerning patterns that may constitute misuse of company resources. I absorbed this information, unsurprised, yet still somehow disappointed to discover that Nathan's deceptive behaviors had extended beyond our marriage into his professional conduct. I see. And you're telling me this because some of these expenses appear to involve the properties you mentioned. Weekend trips documented as client meetings, renovations classified as business entertainment. Peterson's tone became more businesslike. Normally, this would be handled internally, but given the circumstances and your ownership of the properties in question, our legal team suggested reaching out to you directly. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Peterson outlining the company's preliminary findings and their proposed approach to addressing the situation. By the time we concluded the call, it was clear that Nathan's carefully constructed professional image was crumbling as thoroughly as our marriage had. His credibility damaged beyond the repair a simple apology or repayment plan could offer. I felt a complex mixture of emotions as I set down the phone. Vindication, certainly, but also a profound weariness at discovering yet another layer of deception. How far did Nathan's duplicity extend? What else might surface in the coming weeks as the careful compartments of his life continued to collapse into one another? My contemplation was interrupted by Megan's return from her therapy clients, her arrival announced by the jingle of keys and the rustle of grocery bags. "I come bearing sustenance," she called, navigating through her apartment doorway with practiced ease despite her heavily laden arms, and potentially life-changing news. I moved to help her with the bags. Curiosity piqued. Life-changing might be overselling grocery contents, even by your standards. "Not the groceries," Megan clarified, extracting a bottle of wine with a flourish. "Though this Pinot Noir is supposedly transcendent according to the very enthusiastic shop owner. No, the news is about Caroline Barnes." "Your client with the event planning business?" I recalled vaguely, organizing vegetables on the counter as we spoke. "Former client, ethical boundaries and all that. But yes." Megan paused for dramatic effect. "She's looking for a financial partner for her business, someone with both capital to invest and actual financial expertise to help grow the company beyond the one-woman operation she's been running." I paused in my vegetable arrangement, sensing where this conversation was heading. "Megan, just hear me out," she pressed, uncorking the wine with determined efficiency. "You're a CPA with inheritance money currently tied up in real estate, some of which you're planning to sell. Caroline has a thriving business that needs strategic financial guidance to expand. The universe is practically shouting at you." "The universe? Or my overly invested best friend?" I countered, though without real opposition. The idea was intriguing, redirecting my financial resources from properties steeped in betrayal towards something productive, something future-oriented rather than past-fixated. Consider it cosmic intervention channeled through your incredibly wise friend. Megan poured 2 glasses of wine, sliding one across the counter to me. "Caroline's hosting a small gathering this weekend for potential investors. No pressure, just exploration. Say you'll come with me?" I considered the invitation, weighing it against my initial inclination to maintain low visibility as the dust settled from the timber room confrontation. Portland's business community wasn't enormous. There would certainly be people at Caroline's gathering who had heard about Nathan's promotion dinner debacle through the efficient grapevine of professional gossip. And yet, wasn't that precisely the narrative control I needed to reclaim? The story circulating was undoubtedly Nathan's version, or some corporate sanitized approximation. Perhaps it was time to write a new chapter rather than hiding from the previous one's public reading. "All right," I agreed, raising my glass in mock toast. "To cosmic intervention." "And transcendent Pinot Noir," Megan added, clinking her glass, against mine. The weekend arrived with unexpected speed, The days between filled with practical matters. Consultations with a real estate agent about the Portland house, preliminary divorce filing preparations with Daniel, and a productive meeting with my financial advisor about liquidating assets for potential investment opportunities. I approached Caroline's gathering with cautious optimism, selecting an outfit that projected confident professionalism rather than recently separated vulnerability. The event was held at Caroline's newly opened event space in the Pearl District, a beautifully renovated industrial building with exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings, and carefully curated lighting that transformed the raw space into something both elegant and approachable. About 30 people mingled throughout the main floor, the ambient conversation punctuated occasionally by appreciative laughter or enthusiastic greetings. Caroline's genius is creating spaces that feel simultaneously exclusive and welcoming, Megan explained as we entered, accepting champagne flutes from a passing server. She did Jensen Medical's charity gala last year with half their usual budget and somehow made it look twice as expensive. I nodded, surveying the room with both personal and professional interest. The overhead costs for a space like this in the Pearl would be substantial, but if Caroline's client list was strong enough to maintain consistent bookings, the investment potential was significant. The financial planner in me was already calculating potential returns when a familiar voice caught my attention. Olivia? Olivia Mitchell? I turned to find Jessica Watkins, a former college classmate who had gone into commercial real estate development. We'd occasionally encountered each other at Portland business functions, usually with Nathan smoothly monopolizing the conversation with his practiced networking charm. Jessica, I greeted her with genuine warmth, relieved to see a familiar face not directly connected to my marital situation. It's been ages. Are you interested in event planning ventures? Commercial property is my game, as you know, she replied, gesturing around the renovated space. Caroline's lease here is through my firm, but I'm always looking for smart investment opportunities, and her expansion plans are intriguing. She hesitated briefly, her expression shifting to one of careful concern. I heard about recent developments. Are you doing okay? And there it was, the inevitable acknowledgement of my public marital collapse. I took a measured sip of champagne, using the moment to determine how much I wanted to share with someone who was more acquaintance than friend. I'm transitioning, I offered finally, deciding on honest simplicity. Reclaiming some properties, exploring new opportunities, starting fresh. Jessica's expression relaxed somewhat, professional interest replacing personal concern. Properties? In Portland? Among other locations, I confirmed. I'm actually considering selling the Irvington house, possibly the Bend cabin as well, depending on how certain investment prospects develop. The Craftsman on Knott Street? Jessica's eyes widened with professional appreciation. That's a prime location. If you're serious about selling, I'd love to talk with you about it before you list. I have clients specifically looking in that neighborhood. The conversation shifted smoothly into professional territory, Jessica outlining current market conditions for Portland's historic homes and the increasing demand for properties in established neighborhoods close to downtown. We exchanged business cards with a promise to connect the following week, the interaction leaving me with an unexpected sense of momentum. The first tangible step toward transforming assets tied to my past with Nathan into capital for my independent future. Caroline Barnes found us shortly afterward, her energetic presence immediately commanding attention despite her petite stature. With dark curls barely contained in a stylish updo and a vintage-inspired dress that somehow avoided nostalgia. In favor of timeless elegance, she embodied the aesthetic sensibility evident throughout her event space. "Megan!" she exclaimed, embracing my friend with genuine affection before turning to me with an extended hand. "And you must be Olivia. I've heard impressive things about your financial acumen." "All exaggerated, I'm sure," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "But your space speaks for itself. The conversion from industrial to event venue while maintaining the original character is remarkable. Thank you, Caroline beamed, glancing around her creation with justified pride, though the acoustic challenges nearly broke me. Turns out, exposed brick and concrete are gorgeous but terribly echo-prone. For the next half hour, Caroline guided us through the space, pointing out thoughtful details and innovative solutions to the building's inherent challenges. She spoke with the passionate precision of someone deeply knowledgeable about their field, her enthusiasm infectious as she outlined her vision for expansion, additional locations, a rental inventory of custom furnishings, and potentially a consulting division for corporate clients. The limiting factor isn't demand, she explained as we settled at a high-top table in a quieter corner. Portland's event market is booming, especially as California companies continue establishing satellite offices here. Its capital and back-end infrastructure. I'm brilliant at creating experiences, but mediocre at best with financial projections and scaling strategies. That's where partnership makes sense, I observed, professional interest fully engaged. Your creative vision paired with financial and operational expertise. Caroline studied me with newfound focus. Megan mentioned you might be looking for investment opportunities. She didn't mention you'd actually understand the business challenges beyond the numbers. 6 years of marriage to a sales and marketing executive, I explained, the reference to Nathan emerging more naturally than expected. I absorbed more than I realized about business development, even while focusing on the financial side. A flash of recognition crossed Caroline's face, the momentary widening of eyes that indicated she'd connected my marital status to whatever version of the timber room story had reached her. To her credit, she recovered almost instantly, redirecting the conversation with tactful precision. That combination of perspectives could be invaluable, she continued smoothly. Would you be interested in reviewing my current financials and expansion proposal? No commitment, just professional insight from someone who understands both the numbers and the market positioning aspects. The offer was presented casually, but I recognized the significance of sharing proprietary financial information with a potential investor. It represented trust, not just in my professional capabilities, but in my discretion and judgment. I'd be happy to, I agreed, feeling a spark of engagement that had been absent during the mechanical process of securing property deeds and initiating divorce proceedings. This was creation rather than protection, building rather than reclaiming. Though I should disclose that I'm considering several investment directions at the moment, including potentially partnering with a different venture. Transparency noted and appreciated, Caroline replied with an approving nod. I'll have my current financials and 5-year projections sent over early next week. And Olivia? She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more personal than professional. Whatever you decide, it's refreshing to meet someone embracing new possibilities, rather than remaining stuck in circumstances that no longer serve them. The comment, delivered without explicit reference to my marriage yet clearly informed by whatever she'd heard, struck me as genuinely supportive rather than intrusive. Caroline had acknowledged my situation without making it the defining element of our interaction, a refreshing change from the careful avoidance or morbid curiosity I'd anticipated encountering in professional settings. As Megan and I prepared to leave an hour later, having circulated among the other guests and exchanged business cards with several potential professional connections, I felt a subtle but significant shift in my emotional landscape. For weeks, my focus had been backward-facing, documenting Nathan's betrayals, securing assets he'd attempted to control, protecting myself from further deception. Tonight had been entirely forward-looking, filled with conversations about possibilities rather than post-mortems. So? Megan prompted as we walked toward her car, the evening air crisp with early autumn chill. Productive evening? Surprisingly so, I admitted, wrapping my light jacket more securely around me. Caroline's business model is solid, with clear expansion potential. Jessica might have a buyer for the Irvington house without even listing it. And no one treated me like I was radioactive after the timber room situation. Because you're not the villain in that story, Megan pointed out, unlocking her car with a beep that echoed in the quiet street. You're the woman who stood up for herself after discovering her husband's deception. That's not a scandal. It's a redemption arc. I considered this framing as we drove through Portland's evening traffic, the city lights reflecting off the Willamette River in shimmering patterns that seemed to symbolize the fluid, changing nature of my circumstances. Perhaps Megan was right. Perhaps the narrative wasn't about exposure or revenge, but about reclamation and renewal. Ryan texted during the event, I mentioned as we approached Megan's apartment. He's back from Asia next week and wants to see the properties, especially Cannon Beach. Says he can help with any repairs or changes needed to denathanize the place. Megan smiled at my brother's characteristic directness. Beach house renovation therapy? That actually sounds perfect. Fresh paint, new furniture, exorcism of cheating ex-husband's energy. Less dramatic than an actual exorcism, I laughed. But essentially, yes. I'm thinking of keeping that property regardless of what happens with the others. Dad loved the coast. The mention of my father brought with it a bittersweet awareness of how differently events might have unfolded had he lived to see the use and misuse of his inheritance. Thomas Mitchell had been meticulous with his finances, building his accounting practice through decades of careful investment and prudent decision-making. Would he have recognized Nathan's manipulative tendencies earlier? Would he have advised me differently about the property titles? He would be proud of you, Megan said softly, somehow following the trajectory of my thoughts as she often did after decades of friendship. For protecting what he left you. For not letting Nathan's betrayal define your future. We arrived at her apartment building, the familiar structure now serving as a temporary sanctuary during this transitional period. As we rode the elevator to her floor, I found myself contemplating the days ahead, the property decisions, the investment considerations, the practical dismantling of a 6-year marriage, with a sense of purposeful determination rather than overwhelmed anxiety. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time since that 2:37 a.m. notification had illuminated Nathan's betrayal, the future seemed to offer possibilities rather than just the absence of what had been lost. I had reclaimed not just property deeds, but the authority to determine what came next, a blank page awaiting a story entirely of my own writing. The Cannon Beach property transformed gradually under autumn skies, the changes both subtle and profound as Ryan and I worked through each room over the course of a week. Unlike the calculated precision that had characterized my property reclamation, this renovation unfolded organically. Decisions made through conversation rather than strategic planning. Changes implemented based on instinct rather than legal necessity. This deck stain is all wrong, Ryan declared on our third morning, coffee mug in hand as he surveyed the weathered boards stretching toward the ocean view. Dad would have hated it, too red-toned. The beach house should blend with the environment, not contrast with it. I joined him at the railing, noting how the morning light highlighted the artificial warmth Nathan had insisted upon during our last renovation. He wanted it to pop in photographs, I recalled, remembering Nathan's concern about how our vacation property would appear on social media. Said the natural finish wasn't distinctive enough. Ryan snorted, the sound carrying on the salt-laden breeze. Distinctive, right. Because that's the point of a refuge by the sea, to make sure everyone knows how expensive your taste is. The observation carried no malice, simply the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had never quite warmed to my ex-husband's value system. Ryan had always maintained a respectful distance in our marriage, offering opinions only when directly asked, but now the filters had dissolved along with the relationship they were designed to protect. Natural cedar it is, I decided, making a note on the growing supply list that would necessitate another trip to the hardware store in Seaside. And maybe remove that decorative railing he added last summer, the one that blocks the lower view when you're sitting down? Already measured for replacement materials, Ryan confirmed, pulling out his phone to show me a sketch of a simpler design that would preserve the panoramic ocean view regardless of one's height or position. Glass panels with minimal framing. You'll see more water, less metal. The week continued in this vein, each modification erasing Nathan's decorative impositions and returning the space to something more aligned with both the natural surroundings and my own preferences. We replaced the aggressively modern light fixtures with softer alternatives, swapped the stark white walls for warm cream that captured rather than reflected the coastal light, and removed the formal dining set that had never made sense in a beach retreat. I don't think I realized how much I'd compromised, I admitted to Ryan as we collapsed onto the newly delivered sofa on our fifth evening, exhaustion competing with satisfaction as we surveyed our progress. Not just with the properties, but with everything. My preferences, my instincts, even my connections with family. Everything gradually realigned to accommodate Nathan's vision. Ryan passed me a glass of wine, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. It's insidious that way. Not dramatic enough to trigger alarm bells, just a slow recalibration until one day you're living entirely on someone else's terms. The insight surprised me, more nuanced than I expected from my perpetually single brother. Speaking from experience? Remember Alexis? Senior year of college through my first year at the architecture firm? I nodded, recalling the ambitious law student who had featured prominently in Ryan's life for nearly 2 years before an abrupt and never fully explained breakup. Same dynamic, different details, he explained, stretching his legs toward the fireplace where driftwood burned with occasional bursts of blue-green flame. Started with little suggestions. My apartment furniture was too bachelor. My career goals weren't ambitious enough. My family connections were limiting rather than supportive. I had no idea, I murmured, trying to reconcile this revelation with my memories of that period. You seemed happy. I thought I was. That's the trick of it. When someone gradually reshapes your reality, you adjust your definition of happiness to match the new parameters. Ryan took a contemplative sip of wine. It wasn't until she suggested I decline Dad's offer to join his firm because it wasn't prestigious enough that I finally recognized what was happening. The parallel to my own experience with Nathan was striking, though the outcome had been dramatically different. Ryan had recognized the unhealthy dynamic and extricated himself before legal entanglements or property complications. I had proceeded into marriage, joint assets, and years of incremental compromises that culminated in outright betrayal. At least you were smarter about it than I was, I observed, not bitterly but with rueful self-awareness. Ryan shook his head, firmly. Not smarter, just different circumstances. And you've handled the aftermath with more grace and strategic thinking than most people could manage. He gestured around the transformed living room. Plus, you ended up with a pretty spectacular beach house, free and clear. The comment, intended to lighten the moment, nevertheless highlighted the strange dichotomy of my current situation. I had secured valuable assets and was establishing a promising new professional direction, all while processing the disintegration of my marriage and identity as Nathan's wife. Success and loss, advancement and retreat, all woven together in patterns too complex for simple categorization. Speaking of strategic thinking, Ryan continued, his tone shifting to something more cautious, have you checked your email today? Mom mentioned something about Nathan reaching out to various family members. I set down my wine glass, the pleasant exhaustion of renovation work instantly replaced by tension. No, I've been focused on sanding cabinets rather than checking. Messages. What did he send? Ryan pulled out his phone, navigating to his email with obvious reluctance. It's comprehensive. A multi-page explanation of his side of the story, carefully worded to make it seem like he's taking responsibility while actually deflecting blame. He handed me the phone, opened to an email with the subject line, "Clarifying recent events," in confidence. The message was indeed extensive, beginning with an acknowledgement of wrongdoing that quickly devolved into a series of justifications: our growing apart due to my career fixation, my emotional distance following my father's death, my unilateral decision-making regarding the inheritance funds. According to Nathan's narrative, Vanessa had been a symptom of our troubled marriage rather than a cause, a misguided attempt to find connection when he felt isolated within our relationship. Most disturbing was his characterization of my property, reclamation as a calculated public humiliation designed to damage his professional standing rather than protect my inheritance, a disproportionate response to his admittedly poor judgment. The message concluded with a request for family members to encourage me toward mediation, rather than continuing with destructive legal proceedings that will only deplete the assets Olivia claims to be protecting. "He sent this to everyone?" I asked, my voice steadier than the churning discomfort in my stomach might suggest. "Mom, me, Uncle James, Aunt Diane, the whole Mitchell family roster apparently. I'm guessing the Campbell side got a similar blast." Ryan reclaimed his phone expression darkening. Classic damage control, getting ahead of the narrative by admitting to lesser offenses while reframing the larger issues. The strategy was indeed familiar. I'd witnessed Nathan employ similar techniques in professional crises, acknowledging surface problems while subtly redirecting blame towards circumstances, miscommunications, or occasionally disposable colleagues. The difference was that I now featured as the unreasonable antagonist in his carefully constructed narrative, rather than the supportive partner navigating challenges at his side. "Mom didn't believe a word of it," Ryan added quickly, correctly, reading my expression. "She called me immediately, said it reeked of manipulation." Uncle James apparently replied all with just 2 words: "Nice try." The family solidarity was reassuring, but couldn't entirely dispel the uneasiness Nathan's message had triggered. This was the first direct counterattack in what had been, until now, a surprisingly muted response to my property reclamation. The timing, coinciding with my retreat to Cannon Beach for renovation work, suggested calculation rather than impulse, perhaps an attempt to sway family opinion while I was less accessible. I should call Mom, I decided, reaching for my own phone, and probably check my email for whatever version he sent directly to me. Ryan nodded, standing with a stretch. "I'll finish up the cabinet hardware while you handle that." Family communication was never my strongest skill set. My conversation with my mother proved both briefer and more supportive than anticipated. Grace Mitchell, never one for drawn-out emotional discussions, dismissed Nathan's email with characteristic directness. "Transparent nonsense," she declared after confirming I was aware of his message. "Though I'm disappointed you didn't tell me what was happening yourself, Olivia. I had to hear about my daughter's marital collapse from Helen Cooper, at yoga of all people." "I'm sorry," I offered, genuine regret coloring my apology. "Everything happened so quickly. Discovering the affair, securing the properties, the confrontation at his dinner. I was focused on getting through each step." "Understandable," she conceded, her tone softening slightly. "And frankly, impressive. Your father would have appreciated the financial acumen, though perhaps not the public setting." The reference to my father's more private approach to conflict brought a smile despite the circumstances. Thomas Mitchell had indeed been discreet in his dealings, preferring behind-the-scenes resolutions to public confrontations. Yet he had also been unwavering once his boundaries were crossed, a quality I hoped I'd inherited along with his head for numbers. "How are you actually doing?" my mother asked after a moment, the direct question carrying unusual emotional weight from a woman who typically avoided probing personal inquiries. Beyond the practical arrangements and legal maneuvers, the question gave me pause, forcing consideration beyond the logistical focus that had characterized my approach since discovering Nathan's betrayal. How was I, underneath the strategic planning and property renovations? "I'm angry," I admitted. Finally, the simple truth surprisingly difficult to articulate. Not just about Vanessa, or even the property manipulation. I'm angry about the years spent adjusting myself to fit what Nathan wanted, dimming certain aspects of my personality, deferring my own preferences, gradually becoming a supporting character in what should have been a partnership. My mother's silence on the other end of the line felt not like absence, but like active listening, an unusual quality in our typically efficient family communications. The hardest part, I continued, finding words for feelings I'd barely acknowledged to myself, is recognizing that while he betrayed me at the end, I betrayed myself throughout. I knew who I was before Nathan, and I let that person fade away inch by inch. "And now?" my mother prompted gently. "Now I'm trying to remember who that person was," I replied, gazing out toward the ocean where twilight was transforming the water into a sheet of hammered silver. What she wanted, what mattered to her beyond being Nathan Campbell's wife. "She's still there," my mother assured me with unexpected tenderness. "She secured her inheritance, confronted a cheating husband in front of his colleagues, and is currently renovating a beach house to her own specifications. I'd say Olivia Mitchell is doing quite well at remembering herself." The observation, coming from my typically reserved mother, carried particular weight, an external validation of the internal strengthening I'd been feeling in tentative moments between practical concerns. Our conversation concluded shortly, after my mother promising to forward any further communications from Nathan while voicing complete confidence in my ability to handle whatever came next. When I finally checked my own email, I found Nathan's message waiting among several others from Daniel, the real estate agent handling the Irvington house, and Caroline Barnes with her promised financial documents. His email to me differed from the version sent to my family, less focused on justification and more heavily weighted toward reconciliation appeals. "We built something valuable together, Liv," he wrote near the conclusion. "A foundation worth repairing rather than demolishing. The properties are yours, I accept that. But our marriage deserves more than a ceremonial execution in front of my colleagues. We owe ourselves at least an attempt at understanding what went wrong and whether it can be made right." The message was polished, persuasive, and entirely characteristic of Nathan's approach to conflict resolution. He was offering a significant concession, acknowledging my sole ownership of the properties, in exchange for what he truly wanted: control of the narrative moving forward. A private reconciliation attempt would provide opportunities to reframe events, to position himself as the flawed but redeemable husband rather than the calculating manipulator exposed in the timber room. I closed the email without responding, not from indecision, but from clarity. There was nothing to say that legal documents wouldn't communicate more effectively. Nathan had crafted a compelling appeal to the woman I had been, the accommodating wife willing to reshape herself around his needs and preferences. That woman no longer existed, gradually reconstructed into someone more closely resembling the independent person who had existed before our relationship began. Ryan reappeared as I set my phone aside, reading my expression with the intuitive understanding of shared DNA and history. "Nathan's special delivery?" "The usual manipulative masterpiece," I confirmed, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Let's finish those cabinets. I'd rather focus on tangible improvements than digital deterioration." The remainder of our Cannon Beach. Week passed in productive rhythm, the property transformation progressing alongside less visible but equally significant personal shifts. Each decision made without negotiating Nathan's preferences, each room reconfigured to reflect my own aesthetic, represented small but meaningful acts of reclamation, not just of physical space, but of independent identity. By the time we packed to return to Portland, the beach house had been thoroughly de-Nathanized, as Ryan termed it. The transformation wasn't dramatic or vengeful. No walls painted in colors Nathan would hate, or furniture selected specifically to counter his taste. Instead, the changes reflected what I genuinely preferred. Choices made without the filter of anticipating his approval or accommodating his priorities. "You know," Ryan observed as we did a final walkthrough before departure, "we never actually replaced the digital frame. The one where you first saw the photos of Nathan and Vanessa." The observation startled me. I'd been so focused on larger renovations that I'd overlooked the small device that had initiated the entire upheaval. The frame was no longer in the kitchen where I'd discovered the replaced wedding photos, presumably moved or packed away during our renovation work. "I think it's in one of the drawers," I recalled, trying to remember when I'd last seen the sleek black rectangle that had delivered such devastating clarity at 2:37 a.m. "Not sure we need it anymore, honestly. I prefer actual printed photographs, if I'm going to display them." Ryan nodded, understanding the subtext. The digital frame represented not just the specific betrayal, but the performative nature of the marriage it had helped expose. The constantly changing images, curated for appearance rather than meaning, updating automatically with carefully selected moments, seemed an apt metaphor for the relationship itself. "What will you put in its place?" he asked as we secured the house, checking windows and adjusting thermostats for our departure. The question lingered as we loaded the car and began the drive back to Portland, the coastal highway winding through forests and alongside ocean vistas in familiar patterns that somehow looked different after a week of reclamation work. What would replace the rotating digital display of manufactured perfection? What images would I choose to surround myself with now that the curator was no longer Nathan, but myself alone? "I'm not sure yet," I finally answered as we approached. The city limits, Portland's skyline emerging through breaks in the tree line. "But whatever it is, it will be authentic. No more curated performances or strategic displays." The answer seemed to satisfy Ryan, who nodded contemplatively before changing the subject to more pragmatic matters. Our arrival time, dinner plans, his flight back to Seattle the following day. Yet the question continued to resonate as we navigated Portland's evening traffic, a metaphorical thread connecting the property reclamation to the larger personal reconstruction still unfolding. What would I put in place of the digital frame? What would I display in the spaces, both physical and emotional, that Nathan had previously occupied? The beach house renovation had been a first step, but larger questions remained about the Portland property being prepared for sale, the Bend cabin awaiting decisions, and most significantly, the life I would construct independent of the identity I'd built as Nathan's wife. As we pulled up to Megan's apartment building, where I would continue staying until more permanent arrangements could be made, my phone chimed with an email notification from Caroline Barnes, a follow-up to the financial documents she'd sent previously, inviting me to tour potential expansion locations the following week. The message represented possibility, a forward direction still taking shape, but offering momentum away from the disintegrating past. Ryan helped unload my bags, his presence a grounding reminder of continuity amid change. We had renewed our sibling connection during the renovation week in ways that transcended mere property modifications, sharing insights and memories long subdued during my marriage to a man who had subtly but persistently positioned himself between me and my family. "Connections. Thanks for everything," I told him as we embraced beside his car, the simple phrase encompassing far more than the practical renovation assistance. "That's what family is for," he replied with characteristic straightforwardness. "The real kind, not the performance version." As Ryan drove away and I carried my bags into Megan's building, I felt a quiet certainty forming beneath the still turbulent emotions of the past weeks. The property deeds had been legally secured, but the more significant reclamation was just beginning. The gradual, deliberate recovery of a self that had been incrementally surrendered during 6 years of marriage. The digital frame that had revealed Nathan's betrayal could stay packed away in a drawer at the beach house. Whatever would replace it, in my homes, in my professional life, in my heart, would be selected not for appearance or performance, but for authentic meaning and genuine value. Not a curated display, but a truthful reflection of whatever came next. 6 months transformed more than just property deeds. The Portland spring arrived with characteristic persistence, rain giving way to tentative sunshine that illuminated fresh possibilities alongside cherry blossoms. I stood at the expansive windows of my Pearl District loft, watching the Willamette River flow beneath bridges that connected the city's divided halves, finding unexpected metaphorical resonance in the view that had drawn me to this space. The decision to sell the Irvington Craftsman had been simple, once Jessica Watkins presented an offer well above market value from clients relocating from San Francisco. The choice to purchase this light-filled loft rather than another traditional home had been equally clear, a definitive step away from the life Nathan and I had constructed towards something entirely my own. Behind me, the open floor plan revealed careful curation, not the staged perfection Nathan had insisted upon, but thoughtful authenticity in every selection. Mid-century furniture mixed with contemporary art acquired from local galleries. Warm. Textiles softened industrial elements. Books filled shelves without concern for color coordination or spine alignment. Nothing chosen for appearance or impression. Everything selected for genuine appreciation or functional value. My phone chimed with a calendar alert. Final review meeting with Caroline in 30 minutes to discuss the partnership agreement. Our attorneys had been negotiating. After months of careful consideration, financial analysis, and incremental collaboration, we were finalizing the investment that would transform her event planning business from successful local operation to regional enterprise with multiple venues and expanded service offerings. The careful approach had benefited us both, allowing Caroline to demonstrate her business acumen beyond creative direction, and giving me time to navigate the emotional and practical aftermath of my marriage's dissolution. The gradual trust building had created a foundation far stronger than a reactive investment decision might have produced. I gathered my materials, the annotated agreement, financial projections, and market analysis that reflected hours of collaborative refinement, feeling professional satisfaction untainted by the anxious need for validation that had characterized similar moments during my marriage. This was neither reaction nor replacement, but deliberate construction of something new. As I prepared to leave, the phone rang with a number I'd deliberately avoided adding to my contacts, but nonetheless recognized instantly. Nathan. His attempts at contact had dwindled over months of firm boundaries and minimal response, making this unexpected call more surprising than distressing. "Hello, Nathan." "Liv." His voice carried the carefully calibrated warmth he deployed in important negotiations. "Thanks for picking up. I wasn't sure you would." I remained silent, neither encouraging nor discouraging the conversation, simply waiting for him to continue. "The divorce papers arrived," he said finally. "Everything straightforward, clean division of remaining assets, no ongoing entanglements." A pause. "You were more than fair with the non-property items." "Daniel advised equitable rather than punitive," I replied, keeping my tone professional. Despite everything, I wasn't interested in unnecessary conflict. "That's appreciated." Another pause, longer this time. "I signed them already. No contests, no delays. You should have them back within days." The information was welcome, but hardly explained the personal call rather than communication through attorneys. I waited, glancing at my watch and noting the dwindling minutes before my meeting with Caroline. "I'm calling because..." He hesitated, uncharacteristic uncertainty breaking through the polished delivery. "I'm leaving Portland. Accepted a position with a firm in Chicago. Fresh start." The news registered as a small, complex ripple across an emotional landscape that had gradually stabilized. Nathan leaving Portland meant no accidental encounters at industry events, no mutual acquaintances providing awkward updates, no need to wonder if the car glimpsed at a stoplight contained my ex-husband. Distance that had been emotional would now be physical as well. "Congratulations," I offered, the response genuine if reserved. "Chicago is a significant market." "It is." A breath. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through the inevitable rumor mill. And to say, another uncharacteristic pause. "I'm sorry, Olivia. Not just for Vanessa, but for everything before that. The gradual dishonesty about the properties, the controlling behavior, the way I tried to reshape you to fit my vision. I see it now, though far too late to matter." The apology, more comprehensive than any he'd offered during the dissolution process, carried the weight of belated self-awareness. Whether catalyzed by professional consequences, personal reflection, or simply the pragmatic recognition that the marriage was irretrievably finished, Nathan seemed to have achieved some genuine understanding of what had transpired between us. "Thank you for saying that," I acknowledged, neither dismissing the apology nor offering absolution. "I hope Chicago brings you what you're looking for." "You seem to have found what you needed here," he observed, no bitterness coloring the eye. Assessment. "I've heard about your investment in Caroline's business. It sounds like a perfect fit for your financial expertise." The reference to my professional advancement confirmed my suspicion that Nathan had maintained connections to Portland's business community despite the damage to his reputation. Information still flowed to him through channels I might never identify. "It's been a positive development," I confirmed without elaborating. "I should go, Nathan. I have a meeting shortly." "Of course." A final hesitation. "The beach house looks good, by the way. Ryan did excellent work with the renovation. The natural cedar stain was the right choice." The comment startled me. "How would you know that?" "I drove by last weekend, one last visit to the coast before the move." His voice softened with what sounded like genuine regret. "I didn't stop or approach the property. Just wanted to see it once more, to remember the parts that were real before everything else." The admission created an unexpected moment of connection, not reconciliation or forgiveness, but simple human recognition of what had been lost alongside what had been falsified. Despite everything that had transpired, certain moments had contained authentic appreciation for the coastal beauty, genuine enjoyment of the retreat we'd created there. "I hope you find peace in Chicago, Nathan," I offered, the sentiment honest if carefully bounded. "Goodbye." As I ended the call and gathered my things for the meeting with Caroline, I realized the conversation had affected me less than I might have anticipated 6 months earlier. Nathan's apology and impending departure registered not as emotional upheaval, but as practical information. Another step in the ongoing disentanglement from a relationship that had once defined my daily existence. The Pearl District streets bustled with lunchtime activity as I walked the short distance to Caroline's flagship venue where our meeting would take place. The familiar path represented a new routine established in recent months: consulting sessions, planning meetings, collaborative problem-solving that gradually transformed business relationship into genuine partnership built on complementary strengths. Caroline greeted me in the stylishly appointed office she'd carved from a corner of the industrial space, her characteristic energy tempered by professional focus as she reviewed final changes to our agreement. The months of careful consideration had yielded a structure that protected both our interests while creating genuine opportunity for shared success. "The lawyer's revisions look solid," she confirmed, highlighting several clauses that had required careful negotiation. "Strong protection for your investment capital while maintaining operational flexibility for creative decisions. Balanced control mechanisms with clear conflict resolution protocols." I nodded, appreciating the straightforward assessment. We've created something genuinely equitable, not just legally sound, but practically workable. Speaking of practically workable, Caroline segued with practiced ease. Megan mentioned you might be interested in the Lake Oswego property for personal use occasionally. We should discuss preferential booking terms if that's the case. The reference was to a lakefront venue we'd recently acquired as part of the expansion. A stunning property with both event capabilities and private accommodation that could serve multiple functions within the growing business. The possibility of occasional personal use had indeed crossed my mind, particularly as the anniversary of my father's death approached and family gathering plans took shape. That would be appreciated, I acknowledged, though with standard compensation, to the business, of course, no special financial treatment. Caroline's smile reflected approval of the ethical boundary. Of course, just priority access when the calendar allows. She closed the folder containing our agreement and transitioned to a less formal posture. How are you doing with everything? Megan mentioned Nathan's leaving Portland. The question was offered with genuine concern rather than intrusive curiosity, reflecting the cautious friendship that had developed alongside our business relationship. Caroline had navigated the complexity of partnering with someone emerging from marital dissolution with remarkable sensitivity, never pushing for personal disclosure while making space for it when relevant to our working dynamic. I'm good, I replied, the simple assessment more truthful than elaborate explanations could convey. His departure feels like the final punctuation mark on a chapter that's already concluded, the practical end matching the emotional one. Caroline nodded, understanding without requiring elaboration. And the new chapter? Beyond our business venture? I considered the question, appreciating its open-ended framing. The new chapter encompassed far more than professional developments or investment strategies. It included reconnections with family, strengthened friendships, rediscovered interests, and a reclaimed sense of self that continued evolving beyond the constraints Nathan had gradually imposed. Still being written, I offered with a small smile, but with authentic authorship, this time. After finalizing our meeting details and confirming the timeline for official partnership announcements, I walked back through downtown Portland toward my Pearl District loft. The city felt different now, not just because I viewed it from a new neighborhood or navigated it with altered daily patterns, but because I experienced it through a reconstructed sense of self that continued strengthening with each deliberate choice. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Cannon Beach property winterization complete. Left something on the mantle for you. Check next time you're there. The message triggered immediate curiosity about my brother's unspecified gift, along with appreciation for his continued partnership in maintaining the coastal property that had become my favorite among the reclaimed assets. While the Bend cabin had been sold to finance my investment with Caroline, and the Portland house had funded my new living situation, the beach house remained as tangible connection to my father's legacy and the future he'd hoped to help secure. I sent a quick thank you to Ryan with a promise to visit the property soon, then continued toward home with plans forming for a weekend escape to the coast. The timing felt right. A pause between completing the partnership agreement and implementing the expansion plans. A moment to appreciate progress made and possibilities still unfolding. That evening, as spring daylight lingered over the Willamette, I stood again at my loft windows watching Portland transition from workday to evening rhythms. My reflection in the glass revealed someone familiar yet distinct from the woman who had discovered betrayal at 2:37 a.m. months earlier. The same features, animated by different understanding. The same eyes viewing the world through altered perspective. The property deeds secured during those urgent weeks remained safely filed, their legal significance undisputed, but their emotional importance gradually diminishing as new foundations were established. What had begun as desperate protection of inherited assets had evolved into deliberate construction of a life designed around authentic values rather than external expectations. The digital frame that had revealed Nathan's betrayal remained packed away in a beach house drawer, replaced not by another electronic display, but by carefully selected photographs in simple frames. My father standing proudly outside his accounting office, Ryan and me laughing on the Cannon Beach property the day we found it, My mother uncharacteristically serene during a recent visit to the coast. Megan and Caroline raising glasses at the launch of our business partnership. Not curated perfection, but authentic connection. Not strategic presentation, but meaningful remembrance. Each image representing relationships that supported rather than constrained, connections that enhanced rather than diminished. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.